The ice stretched before her, like a promise written in silver and shadow. Claire Mathison stood at the edge of what the real estate agent had called a frozen liability, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been locked tight for 3 years, ever since the hospital called to say her husband's heart had simply stopped beating while he slept beside her. The property deed, crumpled in her coat pocket, felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. 200 acres of mountain wilderness, surrounding a lake that stayed frozen 8 months out of the year. No road access, no utilities, no neighbors within 5 miles. The auction listing had been brutally honest. Worthless recreational land, mineral rights unknown, structures condemned. As a sale only, she had bid $800. No one else bid at all. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story is touching you already, make sure you're subscribed. I've got something extra special saved for tomorrow. The wind came down from the peaks with sound like breathing, stirring the snow into small spirals that danced across the frozen lake surface. Claire pulled her wool cap lower over her ears and studied the landscape with eyes that had learned to see past what things appeared to be. The mountains rose on 3 sides, their granite faces scarred by centuries of weather. Pine forests climbed the slopes in dark green waves, and somewhere in that wilderness, according to the survey map folded inside her truck, there was a cabin, or what remained of one. Her dog, a border collie mix named Juniper, pressed against her leg the way she always did when Claire went too still for too long. The dog had been with her through everything, through the funeral where she couldn't cry because the grief felt too large to fit through tears, through the sale of the house that had become a mausoleum of memories, through the long nights in her sister's guest room when she lay awake, wondering if she would ever feel like a whole person again. "What you think, Junie?" Claire whispered. "Did I just buy the world's most expensive mistake?" Juniper's tail wagged once, uncertain, as if she understood the question but didn't have an answer. The lake was called Thornback Lake on the old maps, though no one seemed to know why. The county records showed it had been privately owned since 1889, passed down through a family named Kellerman until the last heir died without children and the property went to auction for unpaid taxes. Claire had researched it obsessively in the 3 weeks between discovering the listing and the auction date, searching for some rational explanation for the magnetic pull she felt toward a place she'd never seen. She found almost nothing. A few mentions in Historical Society archives about ice harvesting in the early 1900s. A notation in a 1947 geological survey about unusual mineral compositions in lake bed sediment. A single photograph from 1952 showing a small cabin on the eastern shore, smoke rising from its chimney, a woman standing in the doorway too far away for her face to be clear. That photograph had made Claire's breath catch, not because of the cabin or the historical curiosity, but because of the woman's posture, the way she stood, shoulders back, chin lifted, facing the camera with what looked like defiance, or perhaps simply the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Claire recognized that stance. She had practiced it in mirrors, trying to convince herself she possessed it. Now, standing on the shore of a frozen lake, she wondered if buying this place was an act of courage or desperation. Probably both. Probably they were the same thing when you'd lost everything that mattered and needed to find something, anything, that felt like forward motion. The cabin sat about a quarter mile along the shoreline, barely visible through the trees. Claire had spotted from the county road overlooked before descending the old logging trail that passed for access. From this distance, it looked small and dark, hunched against a mountain like something trying to make itself invisible. She started walking, her boots breaking through the snow crust with soft, crunching sounds. Juniper ranged ahead, nose working the cold air, pausing occasionally to look back and make sure Claire was following. The wind died as they entered the tree line, and the silence that replaced it felt alive, waited with attention. The forest here was old growth, towering ponderosa pines and Douglas firs that had been seedlings when the Kellerman family first claimed this land. Their trunks rose like cathedral columns, blocking most of the thin winter sunlight, and creating a perpetual twilight beneath their canopy. Snow lay in pristine drifts, unmarked by tracks except for the delicate prints of small animals. Squirrels, rabbits, maybe a fox. No human had walked here in months. Maybe longer. Claire felt her heart rate quicken as the cabin came into view through the trees. It was larger than she'd expected from the distance, a solid structure built from logs that had weathered to silver gray. The roof sagged in the middle, but was still intact, covered with rusted metal sheeting that had somehow survived decades of snow load. 2 windows flanked a central door, their glass miraculously unbroken, though so dirty they looked opaque. The porch had collapsed on one side, but the other half remained, and someone, probably the last Kellerman, had stacked firewood there under a tarp that had long since deteriorated into shreds. Claire climbed the 3 steps carefully, testing each board before putting her full weight on it. The door was locked, or more accurately, swollen shut from moisture and time. She put her shoulder against it and pushed. It resisted, then gave suddenly with a groan that echoed across the frozen lake. Inside was darkness and the smell of abandonment, dust and mouse droppings and the faint sweetness of old wood slowly returning to earth. Claire pulled her flashlight from her pack and swept the beam across the interior. 1 large room, maybe 20 feet by 15. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, its chimney rising through the sagging roof. A cast iron stove sat in one corner, its pipe disconnected and lying on the floor. Shelves lined the walls, still holding glass jars whose contents had long since spoiled or evaporated. A table and 2 chairs stood near the window, coated in dust but solid, handmade from the same logs as the cabin itself. And books, everywhere books, stacked on shelves, piled on the floor, filling crates that had been pushed against the walls. Claire picked up the nearest one carefully, afraid it might crumble in her hands. The binding was leather, cracked with age. She opened it gently. A journal, handwritten entries in faded ink, dated 1889. Her breath caught. Someone lived here, she whispered. Really lived here. Juniper had stayed on the porch, unwilling to enter the dark space. She whined softly, a sound that meant uncertainty or concern. Claire returned to the doorway and knelt beside the dog. "It's okay, girl. Just old and dusty. Nothing to worry about." But even as she said it, she felt something odd. Not threatening, exactly. More like the cabin was holding its breath, waiting for something. Waiting to see if she would stay, or if she would be like all the others who had looked at this property and seen only worthlessness. She spent an hour exploring the cabin, moving carefully around debris and checking for structural damage. The walls were solid, the logs still tightly fitted despite their age. The roof needed repair, but the damage was localized to the center where a tree branch had apparently fallen years ago. The floor was sound, made of thick planks that barely creaked under her weight. Whoever built this place had known what they were doing. They had built for permanence, not just survival. The journal entries called to her. Claire found herself sitting at the dust-covered table, flashlight propped on a stack of books, reading words written more than a century ago by someone named Margaret Kellerman. January 15th, 1889. The men from town say, "I'm mad to winter here alone." They say the cold will kill me, or the isolation will drive me to it myself. They don't understand that I came here to escape madness, not embrace it. The city crushed something in me that I'm only now learning to feel again. Here, in the silence, I can hear myself think. I can remember who I was before I became what everyone needed me to be. Claire's throat tightened. She knew that feeling, the sensation of losing yourself so gradually you didn't notice until one day you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back. January 22nd, 1889. The lake froze solid yesterday. I walked out to the center this morning and stood there, feeling the thickness of the ice beneath my feet, the vast weight of water beneath that. Something about it feels powerful, ancient, like the earth is showing me what real strength looks like, not loud or aggressive, but patient, enduring. The lake will melt come spring, but right now it's solid enough to bear the weight of anything. I want to be like that, solid enough to bear whatever weight I'm carrying. Claire read entry after entry as the winter afternoon dimmed toward evening. Margaret's words painted a picture of a woman who had fled from something, an unhappy marriage. Claire gathered from oblique references, and found in this isolated place not loneliness but freedom. She wrote about learning to cut ice from the lake and store it in a shed she dug into the hillside, about befriending a trapper who taught her to set snares and read weather signs, about the exact angle of winter sun through the cabin windows, and how she'd position her chair to catch every moment of pale warmth. She wrote like someone discovering herself. Claire understood that, too. The way isolation could strip away all the performances, all the versions of yourself you maintained for other people, until you were left with just the core, the truth of who you actually were when no one was watching. February 8th, 1889. Something strange happened today. I was walking on the lake, checking the ice thickness near the northern shore where the creek feeds in, when I heard a sound beneath my feet. Not cracking. I know what that sounds like, and this wasn't it. This was more like knocking, regular, rhythmic, as if someone were tapping on the underside of the ice. I stood very still and listened. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I waited, but it didn't repeat. When I examined the ice carefully, I found it was nearly 2 feet thick. Solid, safe, but something was making that sound, something beneath the surface. Claire's pulse quickened. She flipped ahead, looking for more references to the strange sounds. February 15th, 1889. The knocking came again, same location. This time I marked the spot with a pile of stones on the shore, so I can find it when the ice melts. I don't know what's down there. The water is deep in that area. 40 feet at least, according to the depth soundings recorded in the property survey. Too deep for any natural phenomenon I can imagine. I asked Thomas, the trapper, if he'd ever heard of anything like it. He got a strange look on his face and said the Shoshone people who used to hunt these mountains wouldn't come near this lake. They called it the Singing Water and said it was home to spirits who should not be disturbed. I don't believe in spirits, but I believe in mysteries. And this lake is keeping one. Claire leaned back in a chair, her mind racing. The lake was still frozen now, in late December. If she wanted to investigate whatever Margaret had heard, she'd have to wait until spring. Or she looked out the dirty window toward the ice, barely visible in the gathering dusk. The lake's surface glowed faintly, reflecting the last light from the sky. Solid, walkable. Whatever was down, there had been down there for more than 100 years. It could wait a few more months. But the thought wouldn't leave her alone. Juniper barked suddenly, sharp and urgent. Claire stood quickly, moving to the door. The dog was at the edge of the porch, hackles raised, staring into the trees. "What is it, girl?" Then she heard it. An engine, a truck or ATV, coming down the old logging trail. Claire felt a spike of anxiety. She hadn't expected visitors. Hadn't expected anyone to even know she was here. The vehicle appeared through the trees, a battered pickup truck with mud-caked fenders and a gun rack in the back window. It stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, and 2 men climbed out. They were dressed in hunting gear, both carrying rifles slung over their shoulders in a way that was probably meant to look casual, but made Claire's stomach clench with unease. She stepped onto the porch, keeping Juniper close. "Can I help you?" The older of the 2 men, maybe 60, with a gray beard and a face weathered by decades of mountain weather, studied her with open skepticism. "You're the one who bought this place?" "I am." "For how much?" Claire's jaw tightened. "I don't think that's your business." "Everything that happens on this mountain is my business," the man said. His tone wasn't overtly hostile, but there was an edge to it, an assumption of authority. "I'm Dale Carver. I run the hunting lodge 5 miles north. Been in these mountains 40 years. This property's been abandoned since old Ruth Kellerman died back in 2015. Most people assumed it would stay that way. Well, it won't." Claire kept her voice steady. "I own it now." The younger man, maybe Dale's son, they had the same sharp features, laughed. "Own it? Lady, you can't even get to it half the year. No road access. No power, no nothing. What exactly do you plan to do with a frozen lake and a condemned cabin? That's also not your business." Dale's expression hardened. "See, that's where you're wrong. That lake connects to the watershed that feeds my property. Anything that happens here affects me. So, yeah, it kind of is my business." Claire felt Juniper press against her leg. The dog was growling now, a low sound that meant she sensed threat. Claire forced herself to breathe slowly, to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The property is legally mine. I have the deed. If you have concerns about water rights, you can take them up with the county. Water rights, Dale repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. You city people come up here and think you can just buy a piece of mountain and play at being pioneers. You have no idea what you're getting into. This land isn't forgiving. And that lake... He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. That lake has a reputation. What kind of reputation? He exchanged a glance with the younger man, the kind that keeps smart people away. I'm not interested in superstition, Claire said. It's not superstition, the younger man said. 3 people have drowned in that lake. 2 ice fishermen and a kid who went through weak ice back in the 70s. Bodies were never recovered. Water's too deep, too cold. Things go down there, they don't come back up. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I'm sorry about those deaths. But that doesn't change anything. This is my property. Dale stepped closer, close enough that Juniper's growl grew louder. Let me make this simple. You paid, what, a few $100s for this place? I'll give you $5,000 cash to sign the deed over to me. Right now, you walk away, chalk it up to a learning experience, and everyone's happy. $5,000 was more money than Claire had in her bank account, more money than she'd have for months, given how little was left after selling the house and settling debts. A rational person would take it. A smart person would recognize they were in over their head and accept the easy way out. But Claire hadn't driven 8 hours into mountains, hadn't spent 3 years feeling like a ghost in her own life, to take the easy way out. No, she said quietly. No. Dale's eyebrows rose. Just like that. Just like that. This property isn't for sale. The men stared at her. The younger one looked incredulous. Dale's expression was harder to read. Part annoyance, part something else. Respect, maybe, or anger that she wasn't following the script he'd expected. You're making a mistake, he said finally. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. They stood in silence for a long moment, the forest around them holding its breath. Then Dale shook his head slowly and turned back toward his truck. Don't say I didn't warn you, he called over his shoulder. Winter's just getting started. Let's see how brave you feel when you've been snowbound here for a month with no way out. The truck started with a cough of exhaust. Claire watched it disappear into the trees, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Juniper whined and pressed closer. Claire knelt down and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, feeling the solid warmth of her, the realness of her presence. It's okay, she whispered. We're okay. But her hands were shaking. She spent that first night in the cabin, despite the cold and the darkness, and every rational reason to return to town and approach this project more carefully. She had a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, enough food for 3 days, and a stubbornness that kept her moving forward when every other instinct said to give up. The fire she built in the stone fireplace drew surprisingly well once she'd cleared the debris from the chimney. The old stove wouldn't work without repairs, but the fireplace was solid, built by someone who understood that good masonry was the difference between survival and freezing. As the fire crackled and Juniper dozed beside her, Claire returned to Margaret's journal. She read by flashlight, following the woman's first winter in the mountains, watching her transform from someone fleeing to someone building. March 2nd, 1889. The ice is beginning to soften near the edges. Soon I'll be able to investigate the source of the knocking sounds. Thomas warned me again today, said the Shoshone's stories about this lake weren't just superstition. He said his grandmother told him that something was put in this lake long ago, something that needed to be kept hidden. When I pressed him for details, he wouldn't say more, only that I should leave the singing water to sing alone. But I can't. The mystery of it pulls at me. Maybe that makes me foolish. Or maybe it makes me human. We're drawn to mysteries the way moths are drawn to flame, even when we know we might get burned. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked toward the dark windows, imagining the frozen lake beyond them. What had Margaret found? The journal had dozens of entries remaining, but she was almost afraid to read them, afraid of what they might reveal. A sound cut through the silence, low, resonant, carrying to the cabin walls and the frozen ground beneath. Claire sat up straight, her breath catching. It came again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, clear as a hammer striking stone. Juniper's head shot up, ears forward, a soft whine escaping her throat. The sound was coming from the direction of the lake. Claire grabbed her flashlight and moved to the window, wiping away the dust with her sleeve. The moon had risen, nearly full, casting silver light across the ice. Everything looked still, peaceful, utterly normal. But she had heard it. They both had. 3 knocks from beneath the ice, just like Margaret had described more than a century ago. Claire pressed her hand against the cold window glass and felt her heart racing not with fear, exactly, but with something else. Anticipation. The sense that she had stumbled into something much larger than a simple property purchase. The lake was keeping a secret, and somehow, impossibly, it had waited more than 100 years to share it. Part 2, The Ice Speaks. Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat by the dying fire with Margaret's journal open on her lap, reading by flashlight as the temperature in the cabin dropped steadily. Outside, the moon tracked across the sky, its light painting the frozen lake in shades of silver and shadow. The knocking didn't come again, but its absence felt almost as loud as the sound itself, like the lake was testing her, seeing if she was the kind of person who would dismiss what she'd heard as imagination or exhaustion, seeing if she was the kind of person who would stay. She was. March 15th, 1889. The ice is thinned enough near the shore that I can see through it in places. Dark water moving beneath. Patient as time. I brought rope and grappling hooks today, thinking I might try to explore the area where the sounds have been coming from. But when I reached the spot I'd marked, I found something I didn't expect. The ice there is different, clearer, almost perfectly transparent, like looking through glass. And beneath it, maybe 10 feet down, I could see something that didn't belong. A shape too regular to be natural, too deliberate to be random debris. Claire's breath quickened as she read. I lay on my stomach on the ice, ignoring the cold seeping through my coat, and stared down at it. The water was clear enough that I could make out details. It appeared to be a box or chest, roughly 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, made of metal that had gone dark with age but showed no signs of deterioration. No rust, no damage. Just sitting there on the lake bed as if someone had placed it there yesterday. Except no one has been here. The ice has been solid for 4 months. Whatever that object is, it's been underwater for longer than that. Possibly much longer. Claire flipped to the next entry, her hands trembling slightly. March 18th, 1889. I've made a decision. When the ice melts completely, I'm going to retrieve the box. Thomas thinks I'm mad. He begged me not to disturb it. Said Shoshone stories were about gifts the water won't return. But I have to know. The mystery of it has gotten under my skin like a splinter I can't remove. Besides, I didn't come to these mountains to play it safe. I came because safe was killing me more surely than any risk ever could. The entries that followed describe Margaret's preparations. She commissioned a rope and pulley system from the town blacksmith, lying about her purpose. She practiced holding her breath in the shallows at the lake's edge. She studied the box's position during the final weeks of ice, mapping its exact location relative to shore markers. April 22nd, 1889. Today I brought the box up. It took 4 hours of work. Diving, attaching the ropes, hauling from the shore with a windlass I constructed. The box is heavier than it looks, made of a metal I don't recognize. Not iron, not steel. Something darker, denser. The lock is complex, built into the box itself, with no obvious way to open it. No keyhole, no latch, just a smooth surface that shows no seam except where the lid should separate from the base. I've tried everything I can think of. Nothing works. It's as if the box was designed to be unopened, or to be opened only by someone who knows its secret. Claire leaned forward, riveted. What had Margaret found? April 25th, 1889. I've been studying the box obsessively, running my fingers over every inch of its surface, looking for any clue. This evening, just before sunset, I noticed something I had missed before. When light hits the surface at a particular angle, marks become visible, not engraved, more like shadows beneath the metal surface. Symbols I don't recognize. They might be decorative, or they might mean something. I've copied them into this journal as carefully as I can, though I doubt my drawing does them justice. Claire flipped ahead, looking for the drawing. She found on the next page a careful sketch of intricate symbols that looked vaguely like letters but belonged to no alphabet Claire recognized. Some curved, some angular, all connected in a flowing pattern that suggested language or perhaps mathematics. Her historian's training kicked in. These symbols looked old, very old, pre-Columbian, possibly. But what would native artifacts be doing in a locked metal box at the bottom of a mountain lake? May 3rd, 1889. Thomas came today and saw the box. His face went pale. He recognized the symbols, or some of them. He wouldn't tell me what they mean, only that his grandmother's story spoke of keepers who had things that were too dangerous or too precious for ordinary possession. He said the box isn't locked, it's sealed. And sealing like that isn't meant to be broken by force, but by understanding, by knowing what question to ask. I don't understand. What question? A question of what? He wouldn't say more. He left angry, said I was disturbing what should sleep, but I can't let it go. The box is here, in my cabin, sitting on the table, waiting. Sometimes I swear I can feel a humming, though that's probably imagination. The journal entries became sporadic after that. Margaret wrote about other things, the challenges of summer gardening at altitude, a grizzly that came too close to the cabin, repairs she made to the roof. But she returned again and again to the box, describing failed attempts to open it, strange dreams about water and darkness, a growing obsession that worried even her. August 10th, 1889. I've decided to bury it. Not in the lake. I don't trust myself not to retrieve it again, but here near the cabin, deep enough that it won't be disturbed accidentally. I've spent months trying to open this thing, and all I've achieved is sleeplessness and frustration. Maybe Thomas is right. Maybe some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. The symbols haunt me, though. In my dreams, they move like living things, rearranging themselves into patterns that almost make sense. Almost, but not quite. I wake with a feeling that I'm missing something obvious. Something a child would see that my educated adult mind has been trained to overlook. The rest of the journal covered the remainder of 1889 and into 1890. Margaret wrote about surviving another winter, about learning to thrive in isolation, about becoming someone she barely recognized from her former life. But she never mentioned the box again. Claire closed the journal as dawn light began to seep through the cabin windows. Her mind raced. If Margaret had buried the box near the cabin, it might still be here. Buried objects in this climate, especially metal ones, could survive indefinitely. The ground stayed frozen most of the year, preventing decomposition and preserving anything sealed inside it. But even if she found a box, then what? Margaret, clearly intelligent, resourceful, determined, had spent months trying to open it and failed. What made Claire think she could succeed where a woman who'd lived here, who devoted herself to the mystery, had given up? Juniper stretched and yawned, padding over to the door with a look that clearly said she needed to go out. Claire pulled on her coat and boots and followed the dog into the morning. The cold hit like a physical force. The thermometer on the cabin's porch read 8 degrees Fahrenheit. Claire's breath formed clouds that hung in the still air. The forest around them was absolutely silent. No birds, no wind, just a vast frozen quiet of deep winter. Juniper did her business quickly and returned to Claire's side, unwilling to stray far in the intense cold. They stood together on the porch, looking out at the lake. In the early morning light, the ice surface looked almost ethereal, smooth as glass in some places, rough and buckled in others where the freeze had been uneven. The far shore was barely visible through a thin mist that hung over the frozen surface. And then Claire saw it, a figure, standing at the center of the lake. Her breath caught. She blinked, thinking it must be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the mountains. But no, there was definitely someone out there. Someone motionless, facing the cabin. "Hello," Claire called. Her voice sounded small in the vast silence. The figure didn't move. Claire's heart began to pound. Who would be out on the ice at dawn? And how had they gotten there without her hearing? She'd been awake all night. She would have heard anyone approaching. Juniper began to bark, sharp and urgent. "Stay," Claire commanded. She started down from the porch, moving toward the lake shore. Her boots broke through the snow crust with sounds that seemed thunderous in the quiet. She walked closer. 50 feet. 40. 30. The figure remained motionless. At 20 feet from the shoreline, Claire stopped. From this distance, she could see details. The figure was tall, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothing, a long coat, heavy boots. But something was wrong with it. The proportions seemed off. Too still, too rigid. "Who are you?" Claire called. No response. She took another step, and suddenly Juniper shot past her, barking frantically, running onto the ice toward the figure. "Junie, no. Come back." But the dog kept going, her paws finding purchase on the rough ice, closing the distance to the mysterious figure. And when she reached it, she stopped. She sniffed it once, then sat down and looked back at Claire, tail wagging. It wasn't a person. Claire let out a shaky breath and moved onto the ice carefully, testing each step. The ice here was thick. She could feel its solidity through her boots. She approached the figure slowly. It was a cairn, a deliberate stack of ice chunks and rocks, built to roughly human height and draped with what looked like an old tarp or canvas that had frozen stiff. In the dawn light, from a distance, it had looked exactly like someone standing watch. Claire circled it slowly. Someone had built this recently. The ice chunks on top hadn't been here long enough to bond with the older ice beneath, and the canvas was weathered but not ancient. She lifted the edge of the frozen fabric carefully. Beneath it, stones had been arranged in a pattern, not random, deliberate. They formed a circle maybe 3 feet across, and in the center, someone had scratched marks into the ice. Symbols. The same symbols Margaret had drawn in her journal more than a century ago. Claire's breath came faster. She pulled off her glove and touched the scratches with her bare fingertips. They were recent. She could feel the roughness where something metal had scraped through the ice's surface. Someone had been here. Someone who knew about Margaret's box. Someone who knew about the symbols. Dale Carver's words echoed in her mind. That lake has a reputation. She spun slowly, scanning the shoreline, the trees. No movement. No sign of whoever had built this cairn. But they had been here, probably last night, while she sat inside reading by firelight, oblivious to someone moving across the frozen lake outside. The thought made her skin crawl. Juniper whined and pressed against her leg. Claire knelt down, wrapping her arms around a dog, grounding herself in the animal's solid warmth. "We're not alone here," she whispered. "Someone else is interested in this lake." The question was whether that someone was friend or threat, and what they knew that Claire didn't. She stood slowly, memorizing the symbol pattern scratched into the ice, then headed back toward the cabin. She needed to find where Margaret had buried the box, and she needed to understand what those symbols meant before someone else did. Because Claire was beginning to realize that her $800 property purchase had bought her more than land. It had bought her entry into a mystery that had been waiting more than a century for someone to solve it. The lake was keeping a secret, and that secret was valuable enough that someone was still guarding it, or hunting for it. Claire spent the morning methodically searching the area around the cabin. If Margaret had buried the box near the structure, it had to be within a reasonable distance. Close enough to keep watch over, far enough that casual visitors wouldn't stumble across it. The problem was that near the cabin still meant searching several thousand square feet of ground that was currently frozen solid and covered with snow. She started by mapping the cabin's orientation. It faced south, which made sense, maximum winter sunlight. The collapsed porch was on the west side, suggesting that might have been a secondary entrance or work area. The area north of the cabin, where the mountain slope rose sharply, would have been difficult to dig in even during summer. That left east and south as the most likely areas. Claire paced the perimeter, looking for anything unusual. A depression in the ground that might indicate old digging. Stones arranged in a marker pattern. Any sign that the earth had been disturbed decades ago. Juniper followed her, nose to the ground, occasionally pausing to sniff something intensely before moving on. The dog might not understand what they were looking for, but she sensed Claire's purpose and seemed determined to help. After an hour, Claire stopped at the southeast corner of the cabin, about 15 feet from the wall. Something about the spot felt different. The snow here was slightly thinner than surrounding areas, as if the ground underneath retained slightly more heat, which might mean the soil had been disturbed and settled differently than untouched ground. She pulled a small folding shovel from her pack and began to clear snow. Beneath it, the ground was frozen hard. She'd need better tools and warmer weather to dig here effectively, but she could mark the spot, come back with proper equipment. She was gathering stones to build a marker when Juniper's demeanor changed. The dog's ears went forward, her body tensing. She was staring toward the tree line to the east. Claire straightened slowly, following the dog's gaze. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing. She wore a heavy winter coat and snowshoes, and she was watching Claire with an expression that was difficult to read from this distance. "Hello," the woman called. Her voice was clear, confident. "You must be the new owner." Claire felt her muscles tense. "I am. And you are—" The woman moved closer, her snowshoes making soft crunching sounds on the packed snow. As she approached, Claire could see she was perhaps 70, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a braid, and a face that had spent decades in mountain weather. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, assessing. "My name is Sarah Winterbourne. I was Ruth Kellerman's friend. I came to see who'd been foolish or brave enough to buy this place." Claire Mathison. She kept her voice neutral. "How did you know someone had bought it?" "Small county. Deed transfers are public record. And I keep an eye on this property. Have for years." Sarah stopped about 10 feet away, studying Claire with unnerving intensity. "Ruth made me promise to watch over it. She was afraid of what might happen if it fell into the wrong hands." "What hands would those be?" Sarah's expression was grim. "Dale Carver's, for one. He's been trying to get control of this land for 20 years. Claims he needs it for water rights. But Ruth never believed him. She said there was something else he was after, something he knew about the lake." Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What's in the lake?" "That," Sarah said slowly, "depends on who you ask. Most people think it's just deep and cold. But the old stories, the ones Ruth's grandmother used to tell, they say there's something down there that was hidden deliberately, something valuable enough to kill for. Do you believe that?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I believe Ruth died believing it. And I believe Dale Carver has been searching these mountains for something his whole life. Whether it's in the lake or near it, I don't know. But when he offered you $5,000 for property worth maybe $100, you should ask yourself what he thinks is here." Claire's mind raced. Did Ruth ever mention a box? A metal box that her ancestor pulled from the lake. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "You've been reading the journals. You knew about them?" "Ruth showed me one. Just one. Margaret's first winter here. Ruth had dozens more, but she kept them locked up, said they contained family secrets that weren't meant to be shared." Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping. "What have you found?" Claire hesitated. She didn't know this woman, didn't know if she could be trusted. But something about Sarah's manner, the directness, the concern, felt genuine. Margaret pulled something from the lake. A sealed metal box covered with symbols. She couldn't open it. She buried it somewhere near the cabin. Sarah's face went pale. "She buried it? Ruth never told me that." Maybe Ruth didn't know. The later journals might explain more, but I've only read through 1890 so far. "You need to find it," Sarah said urgently, "before Dale does." "Why? What's so important about a lockbox?" "Because Ruth spent her entire life protecting whatever secrets this property holds. And she died under mysterious circumstances that the sheriff called an accident, but I never believed." Sarah's voice was tight, with old anger. "She fell through the ice in early spring. They said she went out alone, that she must have hit a weak spot. But Ruth knew this lake better than anyone. She wouldn't have made that kind of mistake." Claire felt cold dread pooling in her stomach. "You think someone killed her?" I think someone wanted access to this property badly enough that Ruth's death was convenient, and I think you need to be very, very careful." They stood in silence for a moment. The wind had picked up, moaning through the trees, carrying snow in small spirals across the clearing. "Help me," Claire said finally. "Help me find the box and figure out what it means. If you were Ruth's friend, if you cared about her, then help me finish what she was protecting." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "You don't know what you're asking. This isn't just about buried treasure or family secrets. This is about something that people have died for, something that's been hidden for longer than you can imagine. I don't care. I bought this property. I'm not leaving, and I'm not letting Dale Carver or anyone else intimidate me into walking away." A slow smile crossed Sarah's face. "Ruth would have liked you. Does that mean you'll help?" "It means I'll tell you what I know. What you do with the information is up to you." Sarah gestured toward the cabin. "Can we go inside?" "I'm too old to have serious conversations standing in the snow." Inside the cabin, with a fire burning in the stone fireplace and coffee heating in a pot Claire had brought from town, Sarah told her story. Ruth was the last of the Kellerman line. Never married, no children. She lived here year-round for 60 years, except for brief trips to town for supplies. People thought she was eccentric, a hermit, but she was one of the most educated people I've ever known. She had a doctorate in anthropology from Berkeley, spoke 6 languages, and had traveled the world before settling here in her 30s. Why would someone like that choose to live in isolation? Because she was protecting something her family had guarded for generations. Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, staring into the steam. The Kellermans were originally from Germany. They came to America in the 1840s, part of a wave of immigration. But they weren't fleeing poverty or seeking land. They were running from something. Ruth never told me the full story, but she hinted that her ancestors had been custodians of something important, something that needed to be hidden from people who would misuse it. The box. Maybe. Or maybe the box was just one piece of something larger. Sarah met Claire's eyes. "Ruth once told me that this lake wasn't chosen randomly. Her great-great-grandmother, Margaret, came here specifically because the Shoshone people had legends about this place, about singing water that held memories. Ruth believed those legends had a basis in fact. What kind of fact? She thought the lake might be a repository, a place where something valuable, information, technology, treasure, had been hidden intentionally by people who lived here long before European settlement. She spent decades researching indigenous history, studying symbols and languages, trying to understand what her ancestor had found." Claire felt her pulse quicken. Did she succeed? I don't know. She got secretive in her last years. Excited but frightened. She told me once that she was close to understanding, but that understanding came with responsibility. She said, Sarah's voice caught. She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure the property never fell into Dale's hands. What does Dale know? His family's been in these mountains as long as the Kellermans. There are stories, just whispers really, that both families came here looking for the same thing, that they were competitors, or enemies. Sarah shook her head. I don't know what's true and what's legend, but I know Dale's grandfather died under suspicious circumstances, fell from a cliff while hunting, and Dale's father became obsessed with this property, tried to buy it multiple times. Ruth always refused. And now Dale's trying with me. He'll try harder than offer. He'll try threats. Sabotage. He'll make your life here impossible if he thinks it will force you to leave. Sarah set down her mug. You need to understand what you're up against. Claire stood and moved to the window, looking out at the frozen lake. The cairn she'd found that morning was barely visible in the distance, a dark shape on the white expanse. Someone was on the ice last night, she said quietly. They built a cairn and scratched symbols into the ice, the same symbols Margaret drew in her journal. Sarah joined her at the window. Show me. They bundled up and made the trek across the ice together, Juniper ranging ahead. The wind had strengthened, blowing snow in horizontal sheets that stung exposed skin. The temperature was dropping. When they reached the cairn, Sarah circled it slowly, studying the symbols scratched into the ice. Her face was unreadable. "These aren't random," she said finally. "They're coordinates." "Coordinates? For what?" "Not geographical coordinates. More like a key, a way of mapping something multidimensional." Sarah traced one of the symbols with her gloved finger. "Ruth showed me something like this once. She'd found it in Margaret's papers. She said it was a form of notation used by pre-Columbian peoples to record astronomical events, or to encode messages that could only be read by people with the right knowledge. Someone left us a message, or someone's marking their progress, showing they're close to solving the puzzle." Sarah straightened, her expression grim. "If this was Dale, he's further along than I thought. If it wasn't him, then there's a third player we don't know about." The wind gusted suddenly, and the canvas draped over the cairn whipped loose, exposing what was underneath. Claire gasped. It wasn't just stones. At the center of the cairn, frozen into the ice, was a photograph. Old, weathered, but preserved by the cold. It showed a woman standing in front of the cabin, the same cabin Claire now owned. But the woman wasn't Ruth. She was younger, dressed in clothes from the 1880s. Standing with one hand resting on something Claire couldn't quite make out in the faded image. "Margaret," Sarah breathed. "That's Margaret Kellerman." And the thing Margaret's hand rested on, Claire realized with a jolt of recognition, was a metal box. The box she'd supposedly buried. Except in the photograph, it wasn't buried. It was sitting on a table outside the cabin, and Margaret was standing beside it with an expression that Claire couldn't quite read. Triumph? Fear? Both? "Someone put this here deliberately," Claire said. "Someone who wants us to know they've seen this photograph. They're telling us they know the box exists, and that they're looking for it too." They stood in the bitter wind, staring at the frozen photograph as the implication sank in. The mystery wasn't just about what Margaret had found more than a century ago. It was about what multiple people across generations had been searching for. And now Claire was in the middle of a hunt that had already claimed at least one life. Maybe more. The ice beneath their feet groaned softly, a sound like distant thunder, or like the lake itself, warning them. Some secrets, the sound seemed to say, were buried for a reason. Part 3. The thaw begins. They returned to the cabin as afternoon light began its early winter fade. Claire's mind churned with questions that multiplied faster than answers. Sarah made herself useful, checking the stove's condition, while Claire spread Margaret's journals across the table, looking for any mention of the photograph or who might have taken it. "Here," Sarah said, pointing to an entry dated June 1890. "Look at this. A photographer came through today. Traveling circuit," he said, "taking portraits of settlers for 50 cents each. I nearly sent him away. What use have I for vanity? But something made me say yes. I had him photograph me with the box. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted proof that it exists, that I'm not mad, that this mystery is real, even if I can't solve it." She had the photo taken deliberately, Claire said, as evidence. But evidence for whom? If she buried the box shortly after, why make a record of it? Claire flipped forward, scanning entries. Maybe she didn't bury it then. Maybe something changed. July 15th, 1890. "Thomas came again today, more agitated than I've ever seen him. He says word has spread among the Shoshone about what I found, that people are coming to ask questions, to warn me. He begs me to return it to the water, to seal it beneath the ice again where it belongs. But I can't, not until I understand what it is, why it was hidden, what it means." August 3rd, 1890. 2 men arrived today, white men, well-dressed, claiming to be from the Smithsonian. They'd heard rumors of unusual artifacts being found in these mountains. They asked very specific questions about the lake, about indigenous sites, about what I might have discovered. I told them nothing, but they looked at me in a way that made my skin crawl, like I was an obstacle, something to be removed if I didn't cooperate. After they left, I moved the box from its hiding place near the cabin. It's somewhere safer now, somewhere only I can find it. Claire's breath caught. She moved it. That's why we can't find it near the cabin. Where would she have moved it to? They read on, but Margaret's entries became frustratingly vague after that. References to the new place and where the water speaks, but never specific locations. Either she was being deliberately cryptic, or she'd made the decision not to record the exact location, even in her private journal. Smart, Claire thought. If the men from the Smithsonian, and Claire doubted that's who they really were, had stolen her journal, they wouldn't be able to find the box. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. She was holding a different journal, this one with a cracked leather cover that looked even older than the others. "This isn't Margaret's handwriting." Claire took it carefully. The script was different, bolder, less refined. The date on the first entry was 1947. "I found grandmother's journals today while cleaning out the cabin. Mother always said they were just the ramblings of a lonely woman, but I've been reading them and I think she was wrong. I think Margaret found something important, something dangerous. The box she describes. I remember stories about it from when I was a child. Whispered conversations between my mother and grandfather. Words like sealed and protected and never opened. I thought they were making up fairy tales. Now I'm not so sure. This is Ruth's mother," Sarah said. "Margaret's granddaughter." The entries detailed a woman, Helen Kellerman, becoming increasingly obsessed with her grandmother's mystery. She'd researched the symbols Margaret drew, consulted with anthropologists and cryptographers. She'd even hired a diving team in 1952 to search the lake bottom, looking for any other artifacts that might have been left there. They found nothing. June 1953. "I'm beginning to think the box was never the point. It was a test, a lure, something to distract from the real secret Margaret wrote about where the water speaks. I've spent months trying to figure out what she meant. Today, I think I finally understand. There's a place at the north end of the lake where a spring feeds in from underground. Even in winter, that spot never fully freezes. The Shoshone called it the throat, where the mountain's voice comes through. I'm going there tomorrow to investigate." The next entry was dated 3 weeks later, and the handwriting was shaky. "I shouldn't have gone alone. I shouldn't have gone at all. What I found, I can't write about it directly. But I understand now why Margaret kept secrets. Why some things need to stay hidden. I've reburied what I found. Deeper this time. Under the spring itself. The current will keep it safe. Keep it cold. Keep it from those who would misuse it. My daughter Ruth must never know. She's too curious, too brave. She'll go looking, and looking will destroy her." But the rest of the pages had been torn out, ripped away so violently that only ragged edges remained bound in the spine. Claire and Sarah stared at each other. "Ruth read this," Sarah said. "She must have." And she went looking anyway. And she found something. Something that scared her enough to spend her entire life here, protecting it. Or something that killed her. The fire had burned low. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and with it, the temperature plummeted. The cabin walls creaked as the cold pressed in. Juniper, who'd been dozing by the hearth, lifted her head suddenly, ears forward. Then they all heard it. A sound from outside. Not knocking this time. Footsteps. Multiple people, moving through the snow toward the cabin. Claire moved the window quickly, keeping to the side so she wouldn't be silhouetted against the firelight. Sarah extinguished the lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness lit only by the fire's fading glow. 3 figures approached through the trees. They carried flashlights, the beams cutting through the darkness. Claire recognized Dale Carver's bulk even at this distance. The other 2 were strangers, 1 man, 1 woman, both dressed in expensive outdoor gear that looked too new, too clean. Not locals, not hunters, professional something. Dale knocked on the door. Hard, authoritative. "Ms. Mathison, we need to talk." Claire glanced at Sarah, who nodded. They couldn't pretend no one was home. Smoke from the chimney gave them away. But she didn't have to invite them in. She opened the door a crack, positioning herself in the gap. "It's late. Whatever you want can wait until morning." "I don't think so." Dale's voice was harder than before. Less pretense at friendliness. "These people need to speak with you. They're from the Forest Service. There's been a complaint about your activities here." The woman stepped forward. She was maybe 40, with short dark hair and eyes that assessed Claire with professional coldness. "I'm Agent Morrison, National Forest Service law enforcement. We've received reports of unauthorized excavation on federal land." Claire's stomach dropped. "This isn't federal land. I own it." "Actually," the woman said, pulling out a tablet and displaying a map, "property surveys from 1889 show a surveying error. The original deed was based on incorrect coordinates. Part of what you think you own, specifically the northern third of the lake, is actually within national forest boundaries." "That's impossible. I saw the survey before I bought." "The survey you saw was based on the original erroneous data. We've been conducting a comprehensive remapping of this region, and we found numerous discrepancies." Agent Morrison's expression was bureaucratically neutral. "Until the boundaries are legally clarified, all activity in disputed areas must cease. That includes any excavation, construction, or removal of materials." Claire felt rage building in her chest. This was too convenient, too perfectly timed. "Who filed a complaint?" "That confidential." "Was it Dale Carver?" The agent's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Confirmation enough. "Mr. Carver is a concerned citizen with detailed knowledge of this area. When he reported seeing fresh digging and deliberate disturbance of ground that might contain archaeological materials, we were obligated to investigate. I haven't disturbed anything archaeological." "Then you won't mind if we conduct a survey tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. If we find you've been conducting unauthorized excavation, there will be penalties. Significant ones." Agent Morrison tucked her tablet away. "I suggest you spend tonight thinking very carefully about what you want to tell us." They turned and walked away, flashlight beams bobbing through the darkness. Dale was the last to leave. He paused at the tree line and looked back. Claire couldn't see his expression in the darkness, but she felt his satisfaction like a weight against her chest. When they were gone, she closed the door and leaned against it, hands shaking with anger and fear. "He's lying," Sarah said fiercely. "That survey error is bullshit. The Kellermans have owned this property for 135 years. If there was a boundary problem, it would have surfaced decades ago. But can I prove that? Can I fight the federal government if they say my property line is different than I thought?" "Not easily. Not quickly." Sarah's face was grim. "This is exactly what Ruth warned about. Dale has connections. Money. He's been planning this for years. He's going to use bureaucracy as a weapon." Claire moved to the table, staring at the journal spread across its surface. A century of secrets. A century of protection. And now, when she'd finally inherited the mystery, someone was trying to take it from her through legal maneuvering she couldn't fight. Unless she found the box first. Found whatever Margaret and Helen and Ruth had been protecting. Found proof that this property contained something significant enough that boundary disputes became irrelevant. "Where the water speaks," she said aloud. "Helen said there's a spring at the north end of the lake, a place that never fully freezes." "The throat," Sarah confirmed. "I know where it is. Ruth took me there once." "Can you take me?" "Now? In the dark? In this cold?" Sarah stared at her. "That's insane. They'll be here at 9 a.m. They'll probably bring a full team. They'll comb every inch of this property, and if they find evidence I've been digging, which they will, because I was searching near the cabin this morning, they'll seize everything. The journals, any artifacts, everything. And it'll disappear into some federal warehouse, and the truth will be buried forever. Or you could cooperate with them. Show them the journals. Prove this is a legitimate historical site that needs proper archaeological study. With Dale Carver involved, he'll make sure any archaeological study leads straight to him getting control of whatever's here." Claire grabbed her coat. "No, we go tonight. We find whatever Helen buried, and we document it properly before anyone can take it from us." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Ruth would have done the same thing. "Is that a yes?" "It's an acknowledgement that I apparently make terrible decisions when it comes to this property." Sarah stood, pulling on her coat. "But yes, I'll show you. God help us both." They prepared quickly. Heavy coats, headlamps, ropes, ice cleats for their boots. Claire had basic climbing gear in her truck. She planned to use it for winter hiking, and now it would serve a different purpose. Sarah contributed knowledge. The exact location of the spring, the safest route across the lake in darkness, what signs to watch for that might indicate weakening ice. The spring creates a current, she explained as they made their way across the frozen surface. Even when everything else is locked solid, water is moving underneath. That makes the ice unpredictable in that area. We have to be extremely careful. Their headlamps created small pools of light in the vast darkness. The lake stretched around them, a white plain under a sky crammed with stars. No moon tonight. It had set hours ago. Just a Milky Way spilling across the heavens like a river of light, bright enough to cast faint shadows. Juniper stayed close to Claire's heels, unhappy about being out in the extreme cold, but unwilling to be left behind. The dog's breath formed clouds that glowed briefly in the headlamp beams before dispersing. The temperature had dropped to near zero. Claire's face ached with cold despite her balaclava. Her fingers were already numb inside her gloves. This was dangerous on multiple levels, and she knew it. But turning back felt more dangerous still. After 20 minutes of careful walking, Sarah stopped. There. Do you see it? Claire looked where Sarah pointed. At first, she saw nothing different from the rest of the lake. Then her headlamp caught something, a slight depression in the ice, maybe 6 feet across. And in the center of that depression, a darkness that suggested the ice was thinner there, or absent entirely. That's it, the throat. They approached cautiously, testing the ice with every step. The sound of their cleats biting into the surface was sharp in the silence. 10 feet away, Claire could see clearly. The center of the depression was indeed open water, a perfectly circular pool maybe 3 feet across, its surface utterly still and black. How deep is the spring? No one knows. Ruth said her mother dropped a weighted line and never hit bottom at 300 feet. Claire stared into the dark water, feeling something shift in her chest. Fear and anticipation tangled together. Helen had written that she buried something under the spring itself. But how do you bury something under flowing water? Unless, Sarah, when Helen wrote about burying it under the spring, she might have meant literally underneath, below the spring source. You think she dove down and placed something in the underground channel feeding the spring? Or she found a way to access it from below. Claire pulled out the journals, flipping through Helen's entries by headlamp. She mentions hiring a diving team in 1952. What if she learned enough from them to do her own dive later? In water this cold? Without proper equipment? That would be suicide. Maybe desperation makes you attempt impossible things. Claire found the passage she was looking for. Listen to this. The current will keep it safe, keep it cold, keep it from those who would misuse it. She's not talking about the current around something. She's talking about something in the current itself. You want to dive into an underground spring in sub-zero temperatures in the middle of the night. I want to know what's down there before federal agents seize this property. Sarah laughed, a short, sharp sound. You're as crazy as Ruth, and Helen, and Margaret. She paused. I like that about you. Does that mean... No. It means I'll help you prepare to do this incredibly dangerous thing, and I'll be ready to pull you out when you get in trouble. But I'm not letting you dive into the throat alone. Sarah, you're 70. And I've been winter swimming in these mountains since I was 20. My body is acclimated to cold water in ways yours isn't. Sarah was already stripping off her outer layers. Ruth and I used to do polar bear plunges every New Year's. 2 minutes in ice water, then warm up by the fire. I've done that for 50 years. You've probably never been in water colder than a swimming pool. She was right. Claire had no cold water experience. And attempting a dive into an underground spring, even a shallow dive, with no training was probably stupider than anything she'd yet attempted. How do we do this? Carefully. Sarah pulled a length of rope from her pack. Tie this around your waist. I'll hold the other end. You have 3 minutes maximum before hypothermia becomes critical, less if you go deep. Your mission is simple. Get down, see what's there, surface. No heroics. What if I find something? 3 minutes, Claire. If you can't get in that time, it'll still be there tomorrow. The spring has kept secrets for decades. It can keep them one more night. Claire nodded, stripping down to her thermal underlayers. The cold hit like a hammer. Her skin puckered immediately, every nerve screaming that this was a terrible idea. She attached the rope around her waist with a climbing harness knot, double-checking its security. Sarah braced herself on the ice, wrapping the rope around her body to distribute the load. Ready? No, Claire thought. Never ready for this. Ready, she said aloud. She stepped to the edge of the open water and looked down. The darkness was absolute. The spring's surface was so still it looked solid, like black glass. Then she jumped. The cold hit every nerve simultaneously. Her body locked up, muscle seizing. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the overwhelming shock of immersion. Dive. Some rational part of her brain screamed. Dive or surface. Don't just float here. She kicked downward, forcing her body to move despite its protests. The water was clear. Her headlamp illuminated maybe 10 feet, but beyond that was blackness. She descended, watching the rocky walls of the spring shaft narrow around her. 20 feet, 30, her lungs already burned. The cold was stealing her breath faster than the depth. Then she saw it, a hollow in the rock wall, maybe 8 feet deep. And inside that hollow, secured with what looked like modern climbing pitons, was a waterproof case. Hard plastic, orange, the kind used by kayakers and rescue teams. Claire grabbed it, yanking hard. The pitons held. She worked frantically, her fingers clumsy with cold, trying to release the clasps. Her vision started to narrow. Not enough oxygen. The cold sapping her strength. She tugged harder, and one piton came free. Then another. The case shifted. Her lungs screamed. She needed air. Now, one more piton. She pulled with everything she had. It came free. The case was surprisingly light. Whatever was inside wasn't heavy. Claire kicked the surface, hugging the case to her chest, following the faint glow of Sarah's headlamp above. She broke the surface, gasping, her body shaking so violently she could barely grip the case. Sarah was already pulling on the rope, dragging her toward the ice edge. Got you. Come on. Move, Claire. Hands grabbed her arms. Sarah was stronger than she looked, hauling Claire onto solid ice with desperate strength. Then came blankets, a chemical heat pack press against her chest, Sarah's hands rubbing her arms and legs, forcing circulation. Stay with me. Talk to me. What'd you find? Case, Claire gasped. Under, spring. Helen left it. Good. That's good. Now breathe. Just breathe. The shaking gradually subsided. Feeling returned to Claire's fingers and toes in painful waves. Sarah wrapped her in layer after layer of clothing, then started leading her back toward shore. We need to get you warm. Really warm. We'll come back for the case. No. Claire's voice was harsh. Take it. Now. Claire. They come at 9. We need to know what's in there. She forced her trembling legs to work, to carry her forward. I'm okay. I'm functional. Let's go. They made it back to the cabin in what felt like hours, but was probably 30 minutes. Sarah got the fire blazing, while Claire stripped off wet clothes with fingers that barely worked. She huddled in her sleeping bag next to the fireplace, drinking hot coffee that Sarah forced on her, waiting for her core temperature to rise. The orange case sat on the table, beaded with water, impossible to ignore. When Claire finally felt human again, when her hands had steadied enough to work the case's latches, she opened it. Inside was a leather portfolio, the kind artists use to protect drawings and prints. And inside that, preserved in remarkable condition thanks to Helen's careful waterproofing, were documents. Papers covered with the same symbols Margaret had copied from the box. Photographs of the box from multiple angles, showing details Claire hadn't seen in Margaret's sketches. And a letter, written in Ruth Kellerman's hand, dated 3 weeks before her death. To whoever find this, my mother was right to hide these documents. What our family has protected for generations is both precious and dangerous. The symbols on the box aren't decorative. They're a key, a way of accessing information encoded in the box's structure itself. The metal isn't ordinary. Tests my mother conducted in the 1950s showed it contains elements that shouldn't exist in nature, or shouldn't have existed in the Americas before European contact. The box was created by people we don't have a name for. Indigenous peoples who possessed knowledge we're only beginning to rediscover. Knowledge about metallurgy, about encoding information in physical structures, about hiding things in plain sight, where only those with the right understanding could find them. I've spent my life trying to understand those symbols, and I believe I finally have. They're not a language. They're a map, not of places, but of concepts, of knowledge. Each symbol is a node in a network of information, and understanding how they connect reveals what's hidden. I've solved enough of the puzzle to know the box can be opened, but opening it requires something I don't have, multiple people working together, each contributing a piece of understanding. The symbols represent collaboration, collective wisdom. One person alone can't unlock what's inside. It requires community, trust, the very things our family lost when we decided to hide this secret instead of sharing it. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It probably means I died protecting these documents, this knowledge. Don't make my mistake. Don't try to solve this alone. Find others, people you trust, people who understand that some mysteries aren't meant to be hoarded, but shared. The box is buried where the water speaks and the mountain listens, where coal preserves and depth protects. You're looking in the right place. But know this, once you find it, once you begin to unlock its secrets, you'll become a target. There are people with resources and ruthlessness, who've been searching for this for generations. They don't want the knowledge shared. They want it controlled, monetized, weaponized. Be smarter than our family was. Don't isolate yourself with the secret. Spread it. Document it. Make it impossible to suppress. And forgive us. Forgive Margaret for keeping secrets. Forgive my mother for her fear. Forgive me for not being brave enough to do this differently. The lake remembers. The mountain protects. The ice preserves. Find what we hid, but don't hide it again. Ruth Kellerman, February 2015. Claire read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking again, but not from cold this time. Sarah sat across from her, tears streaming down her weathered face. She knew they would kill her for this. She died protecting it. But she left these instructions because she wanted someone to succeed where she'd failed. Claire looked at the document spread across the table. She wanted the secret shared, not hidden. So what do? We have until 9 a.m. That gives us... Claire checked her watch. 6 hours. 6 hours to find a box, document its location, and figure out how to open it. You heard what Ruth said. It requires multiple people. Collaboration. Then we collaborate. Claire stood, feeling strength returning to her limbs. You said Ruth's test showed the metal contains impossible elements. That means we need expertise. Someone who understands metallurgy, or archaeology, or I might know someone. Sarah pulled out a phone that looked like it had survived multiple decades of mountain weather. Ruth had a colleague, an anthropologist who'd helped her with symbol translation. He lives in Laramie, does consulting work on indigenous artifacts. If anyone can help us interpret this, it's him. Call him. Now. Claire, it's 3 a.m. Call him. Tell him this is urgent. Tell him Ruth Kellerman left documents that prove everything she'd been working on. Tell him we need him here before 9 a.m., or everything Ruth died protecting will disappear into federal custody. Sarah made the call, stepping outside so the conversation wouldn't wake Juniper. Claire used the time to study the photographs, comparing them to Margaret's sketches. The symbols weren't random. Now that she looked at them with Ruth's letter in mind, she could see patterns, the way certain marks connected to others, the way the overall design suggested a circuit or pathway. Ruth had said the symbols were a map, not of places, but of concepts. What if each symbol represented a step in a process, a sequence that had to be followed to unlock the box? But what process? And how would you even begin? Sarah returned, her face grim. Dr. Chin says he'll come. He's leaving now, should be here by 7. But Claire, he's not the only one coming. He said there's been chatter in academic circles. Rumors about a discovery in the Wyoming mountains. He thinks someone leaked information about this site. Dale, maybe, or someone else who's been watching, waiting for the right moment. Then we work fast. Claire pulled on her coat. Let's go back to the spring. Ruth said the box is buried, where the water speaks and the mountain listens. That has to be near the throat. You want to dig in frozen ground in the dark with federal agents arriving in 6 hours? You have a better idea? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, a fierce, reckless smile that reminded Claire why Ruth had trusted her. No, I really don't. Let's go dig up a century-old mystery and probably get ourselves arrested in the process. They grabbed every tool they had, shovels, ice axes, climbing gear, and headed back onto the frozen lake, this time with purpose. This time knowing what they were looking for. The box was down there, under the spring, under the ice, under protection of cold and depth and time. And they had 6 hours to find it before Dale Carver, and the federal government made sure no one ever did. The work was brutal. Sarah and Claire took turns attacking the frozen ground around the spring's opening, their ice axes ringing against earth that felt more like concrete than soil. Every swing sent shockwaves up their arms. Every chip of frozen earth felt like a victory measured in millimeters. Juniper watched from a safe distance, curled into a tight ball against the cold, her eyes tracking their movements with concern that felt almost human. There has to be a better way. Claire, gasped after an hour of backbreaking effort, had produced a hole barely 2 feet deep. Helen did this in 1953, Sarah said, her breath coming in harsh clouds. She didn't have modern equipment either, just determination and time. And she had all summer. We have 4 hours now. Claire stood back, studying the area around the spring. Ruth's letter had said the box was buried, where the water speaks and the mountain listens. They'd been assuming that meant directly beside the spring opening. But what if it meant something else? She closed her eyes, listening. The spring made no sound. Its flow was too steady, too deep to create the babbling noise of surface water. But if she concentrated, she could feel something, a vibration in the ice beneath her feet. Subtle, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Sarah, come here. The older woman joined her, and Claire guided her hand to the ice. Do you feel that? Sarah's eyes widened. A pulse. The water's creating a pressure wave. And pressure waves travel. Claire began walking slowly around the spring, keeping her hand on the ice, feeling for where the vibration was strongest. 20 feet north of the opening, she found it, a spot where the ice seemed to hum beneath her palm, where the vibration was so clear she could almost hear it. Here, where the water speaks. Not the opening, the resonance point. They moved their tools and began digging again, this time with renewed energy. The ground here was slightly different, looser, as if it had been disturbed before and never fully settled. Within 30 minutes, they'd gone 3 feet down. Claire's shovel hit something solid with metallic clang that echoed across the frozen lake. They both froze. Tell me that was a rock, Sarah whispered. Claire knelt, brushing away frozen soil with her gloved hands. Metal gleamed in her headlamp beam. Dark metal, unmarked by rust despite decades underground. It's the box. They worked carefully now, excavating around the object, afraid to damage it. The box was larger than Claire had expected from Margaret's descriptions, maybe 5 feet long, 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and heavy. When they finally freed it from the earth, it took both of them straining together to lift it. The surface was covered with the symbols. Not just a few, but hundreds, perhaps thousands, flowing across every visible surface in intricate, interlocking patterns. In the headlamp light, they seemed to move, to shimmer, though Claire knew that was impossible. It's beautiful, Sarah breathed. It was, and terrifying, because looking at it, Claire understood viscerally what Ruth had meant about danger. This object didn't belong in any museum. It belonged in a vault, or it belonged to everyone. But it definitely didn't belong locked away where only a few powerful people could control access to whatever knowledge it contained. We need to get it to the cabin, Claire said, before anyone sees us. They rigged a sled from rope and a tarp, dragging the box across the ice. It left a clear trail in the snow. Anyone following would know exactly where they'd been. But there was no help for that now. Speed mattered more than stealth. By the time they reached the cabin, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. 5 a.m. For hours until the federal agents arrived. Maybe less if Dale decided to come early. Inside, they positioned the box on the table where Margaret had once photographed it more than a century ago. The firelight danced across its surface, making the symbol seem alive. Claire pulled out the documents from Helen's waterproof case, spreading them beside the box. Ruth's photographs showed details she could now see directly. The way certain symbols aligned with others, the way the pattern suggested connections that weren't immediately obvious. "It's like a puzzle," she murmured, "but three-dimensional. You can't solve it by looking at one face. You have to see how all the surfaces relate to each other." Sarah traced a symbol with her finger. Ruth said it required collaboration. Multiple people, each contributing understanding. But understanding of what? Different types of knowledge, maybe different perspectives. Claire thought about Ruth's academic background, anthropology, linguistics, multiple languages. What if each symbol represents a different domain of knowledge? And understanding how they connect requires expertise in all those domains. Then we're in trouble because we have... Sarah checked her phone. 3 hours and 45 minutes. Headlights cut through the cabin windows. A vehicle approaching far too early for the federal agents. Claire's hand went to the rifle she positioned near the door. But when the truck stopped and the driver emerged, Sarah relaxed. "That's Chun." He made good time. Dr. Marcus Chun was younger than Claire expected, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled into a short ponytail and eyes that went immediately to the box on the table. He didn't bother with greetings. "Dear God, Ruth was right. It's real. You knew about this?" Claire demanded. "I knew Ruth believed she was close to something significant. She'd show me photographs, asked for help with symbol translation. But I thought..." He moved closer to the box, his hands trembling slightly. "I thought it was academic speculation. Not this. Never this. Can you read the symbols?" "Some of them. They're a hybrid script, element from multiple indigenous traditions, mixed with something else. Something I've never seen before." He pulled out a notebook, flipping through pages covered with his own drawings. Ruth and I had identified maybe 30% of the marks. We knew they related to astronomical observations, seasonal cycles, mathematical concepts. But the connections between them... He shook his head. "We couldn't solve it." "Ruth's letter said it requires collaboration," Sarah said. "Multiple people working together." Chin nodded slowly. "Yes, because no single person has all the knowledge encoded here. You need an astronomer, a mathematician, a linguist, a metallurgist, maybe more. Each would see their domain represented. Each would contribute a piece of the solution. We don't have those people," Claire said. "We have 3 hours. Then we work with what we have." Chin set down his bag and pulled out a laptop, a portable scanner, and what looked like specialized photography equipment. "First, we document everything. Every angle, every symbol. If they seize this box, we'll at least have a complete record." They worked frantically. Chin photographed the box from dozens of angles while Claire and Sarah measured, sketched, recorded every detail they could. Juniper paced nervously, sensing the tension, occasionally whining when the humans moved too frantically. As dawn light strengthened through the cabin windows, Chin made a discovery. "Here, look at this." He'd been studying the box's base, which they cleared of dirt. "These symbols form a sequence, like instructions." Claire joined him. The marks he indicated were different from the others, simpler, more direct, and they seemed to include numbers or quantities. "It's a combination," she breathed, "like a lock." "Not just any combination. Look at the pattern." Chun traced it with his finger. "These aren't random. They correspond to celestial positions. Specifically, the position of certain stars on particular dates." "Whatever romantic notions you have about indigenous wisdom," Thorne said, "the reality is that box contains information worth billions. Information that could revolutionize metallurgy, energy production, possibly more. Information that governments and corporations will go to extraordinary lengths to control. Then they should have thought of that before Ruth Kellerman died mysteriously, Claire said. The words hung in the air. Agent Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Dale looked away. Thorne's expression was unreadable. That's a serious accusation. It's an observation. Ruth spent 50 years here protecting something. She died falling through ice she knew better than anyone, and within months of her death, people start circling this property like vultures. Claire stood straighter. I'm not selling. I'm not surrendering it to federal custody based on manufactured boundary disputes. And I'm not letting anyone bury Ruth's work again. Then you're forcing our hand. Morrison gestured to her team. We're seizing the artifact under ARPA, pending resolution of the boundary dispute. You can appeal through proper legal channels. Touch that box, and I'll have every news outlet in the country here by tomorrow morning, Sarah said. I've already made calls. Journalists are very interested in stories about mysterious indigenous artifacts and suspicious deaths of elderly women protecting them. Morrison hesitated. You don't have authority here, Chin added. Not without proof this item originated from federal land. And you can't have that proof because it didn't. It came from underwater, from a spring that entirely within the boundaries of private property. We'll see what a judge says, Morrison replied, but her confidence had wavered. You'll see what happens when Dr. Chin publishes his photographs, Claire said. When the world knows this box exists, knows what it represents, knows that powerful interests try to suppress it. You think a judge will side with you then? Thorne stepped forward, his voice dropping. You're making enemies you can't afford. People who will destroy you financially, legally, socially. Whatever principled stand you think you're making, it will ruin your life. My life was already ruined, Claire said quietly. I came here with nothing to lose. You can't threaten someone who's already lost everything that mattered. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because Thorne's expression shifted. Not defeat, calculation. 24 hours, he said. We'll give you until tomorrow's sunrise. If the box opens and contains what we believe it does, you'll understand why it needs to be controlled, and you'll voluntarily surrender it. And if I don't, then we'll take our chances with the legal system. And trust me, Ms. Mathison, we have far better lawyers than you do. He turned and walked to his Range Rover. After a moment's hesitation, Agent Morrison and her team followed. Only Dale remained, staring at the cabin with undisguised hunger. This isn't over, he said. That box should have been mine. My family's been searching for it for 4 generations. Then your family should have been kinder to Ruth, Sarah snapped. She might have worked with you instead of spending her life hiding from you. Dale's face reddened. You don't understand what's at stake, what that technology could mean. Technology? Claire repeated. You think that's what this is? I know what it is. My grandfather's journals described it. A power source that doesn't deplete. A form of energy that could change everything. Dale's voice shook with conviction. And the Kellermans hoarded it out of paranoia and spite. Or they protected it because they understood something your family never could, Sarah said. That some gifts aren't meant to be owned. Dale left without another word, his truck spraying gravel as he accelerated away. When they were gone, Claire finally allowed herself to breathe. Her legs felt shaky. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. 24 hours, Chin said. Then we'll know if Ruth was right. She was right, Sarah said with conviction, about everything. They spent the day preparing. Chun continued his analysis of the symbols, building a comprehensive database of photographs and measurements. Sarah contacted journalists and academics, creating a network of people ready to receive information if things went wrong. Claire simply sat with a box, studying it, feeling the weight of a century's secrets pressing down. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible mountain stories like this one. Juniper stayed close to Claire, sensing her human's tension, offering the quiet comfort only dogs can provide. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch. No one came. The property remained silent except for the wind in the pines and the occasional crack of ice expanding on the lake. At 4 a.m., Claire woke Sarah and Chun. "It's time." They carried the box carefully down to the lakeshore, positioning it at the spot where the spring's vibration was strongest. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but the promise of it. "According to the calculations," Chin said, "sunrise at winter solstice from this latitude will occur at 7:03 a.m. If the box is programmed to open, then—" "It will," Claire said. She didn't know how she knew, but she felt certain. The box had waited long enough. They sat in the freezing pre-dawn, watching the skies slowly brighten. Claire thought about Margaret, standing in the same spot more than a century ago, watching the same sunrise, wondering what mysteries the lake held. About Helen, brave enough to dive into freezing water to hide what she'd found. About Ruth, spending her entire life as a guardian of secrets that weren't hers to keep but weren't anyone else's to take. About herself, a widow who bought worthless land looking for distance from grief and found instead a purpose worth fighting for. The sun touched the horizon at exactly 7:03. Golden light spilled across the frozen lake, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. The light struck the box's surface, and the symbols seemed to catch fire, glowing as if lit from within. Then, with a sound like a deep breath releasing, the box opened. Not mechanically. There was no click of locks or grind of hinges. The lid simply separated from the base, as if the seal that had held it closed for centuries had finally dissolved. Inside was not gold or jewels or any conventional treasure. What dates? I'd need to calculate, but based on the astronomical alignments. He pulled up software on his laptop, typing rapidly. The winter solstice. Multiple years, spanning centuries. It's marking specific solstice, sunrises across time. Sarah leaned in. The Kellermans came here in the 1840s. Margaret found the box in 1889. That's almost 50 years. What if the box was programmed to open on specific dates? A time lock, Claire said, but based on astronomy, not mechanics. Chen's fingers flew across his keyboard. The next winter solstice is... He paled. Tomorrow, December 21st. They stared at each other. "The box is set to open tomorrow," Sarah whispered. "After more than a century underwater, after decades buried, it's programmed to unlock tomorrow at sunrise. We just have to keep it safe for one more day," Claire said. A sound outside made them all freeze. Engines. Multiple vehicles. Claire moved a window. 3 trucks and 2 SUVs were pulling up to the cabin. Federal agents, she assumed from the official insignia, but also Dale Carver's pickup. And another vehicle she didn't recognize, a black Range Rover with tinted windows. "We're out of time," Sarah said. Chun was already packing his equipment. "I've got photos and measurements. Enough to reconstruct the symbol patterns if necessary. If they confiscate the physical box, they're not taking it." Claire's voice was hard. "Ruth died protecting this. We're not handing it over to people who want to lock it away. Claire, we can't fight federal agents. We're not fighting anyone. We're exercising our property rights and documenting our discovery." She grabbed the journals, Ruth's letter, Helen's documents. "Sarah, help me hide these. If they seize the box, they don't get Ruth's research." They worked quickly, secreting documents in multiple hiding places. Inside the stone fireplaces, loose stones, beneath floorboards, in Juniper's dog bed. Anywhere the agents wouldn't immediately look. A loud knock rattled the cabin door. "Federal agents. Open up." Claire took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door. Agent Morrison stood there, flanked by 4 other agents in tactical gear. Behind them, Dale Carver watched with barely concealed satisfaction. And emerging from the Range Rover was a man in an expensive suit who radiated authority and menace in equal measure. "Ms. Mathison," Morrison said, "we're here to conduct the survey we discussed. At 6:30 in the morning, we received additional information suggesting time-sensitive circumstances." Morrison's eyes flicked past Claire to the box visible on the table. "Is that artifact a result of excavation on disputed federal land?" "That artifact was recovered from private property I legally own. I have documentation, which we'll review, But for now, we need to secure the site and any materials discovered. Morrison gestured to her team. Pursuant to the Archaeological Resources Protection Act. That act applies to federal and tribal lands. Chin interjected, stepping forward. Private property discoveries have different protocols, unless you have evidence this item originated from federal land. We have testimony that excavation occurred in disputed territory. Morrison nodded toward Dale. Testimony from a man who's been trying to acquire this property for years, Claire said, hardly unbiased. The man from the Range Rover spoke for the first time. His voice was cultured, East Coast educated. Perhaps we can avoid legal complications. My name is Richard Thorne. I represent a private foundation interested in indigenous artifacts. We'd be willing to purchase the box from Ms. Mathison for fair market value. That would resolve the question of ownership cleanly. It's not for sale, Claire said flatly. Ms. Mathison, you don't understand the value of what you found, or the danger. That box has been sought by collectors and governments for over a century. People have died. I know. Ruth Kellerman died, possibly murdered by someone who wanted what she was protecting. Thorne's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. All the more reason to accept a reasonable offer and remove yourself from a dangerous situation. How much are you offering? Sarah asked suddenly. Claire shot her a shocked look, but Sarah's face was unreadable. $500,000, Thorne said. Cash. Immediate transfer. The sum was staggering. More money than Claire would earn in 10 years. Enough to solve every financial problem she had. $1 million, Sarah countered. Sarah, Claire began. Ruth spent her life protecting this. If someone wants to buy it from us, they should pay what it's actually worth. Sarah's voice was steel. $1 million, plus documentation that this property's boundaries are exactly what the original 1889 survey indicated. No federal disputes. No complications. Thorne considered. Agreed. No, Claire said. It's not for sale at any price. Claire, be reasonable. Ruth's letter said the box opens tomorrow at winter solstice sunrise. One more day. That's all we need to keep it safe. Claire looked directly at Thorne. And then whatever's inside will be documented and released publicly. No private foundation control. No government seizure. Public knowledge. Thorne's mask slipped. For just a moment, Claire saw fury and something else. Fear. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he said softly. What's in that box isn't meant for public consumption. The knowledge it contains was hidden by people who apparently wanted it preserved for a reason, and that reason wasn't so rich collectors could profit from it. The people who sealed that box, Thorne said, did so because the knowledge inside was too dangerous to share freely. They understood what you clearly don't, that some information in the wrong hands causes destruction. They were protecting humanity by locking away. Or they were protecting their own power, Chin said. Indigenous cultures didn't hide knowledge because it was dangerous. They encoded it in ways that required wisdom and collaboration to access. That's not suppression. That's careful stewardship. Inside was light, literally, a soft, steady glow that seemed to emanate from the box's interior walls. And within that glow, suspended somehow without any visible support, was a sphere maybe 6 inches in diameter. It looked like crystal or glass, but it pulsed gently with light that seemed to come from deep within its structure. And across its surface, symbols flowed like living things. The same symbols from the box's exterior, but moving, connecting, forming patterns that shifted and changed as Claire watched. It's beautiful, Sarah whispered. Chin was frantically photographing, his scientific training warring with obvious awe. The symbols are moving, actually moving. That shouldn't be possible unless it's not a static object, unless it's displaying information somehow. Claire reached toward the sphere, then hesitated. Should we touch it? Ruth's letter said it required collaboration, Sarah said. Maybe that means we should all touch it together. They looked at each other. Then, moving as one, they each reached out and placed a hand on the sphere's surface. The world exploded into light and knowledge. Images flooded Claire's mind. Not words, Not even pictures exactly, but concepts that downloaded directly into understanding. She saw indigenous peoples working with materials and technologies that shouldn't have existed. She saw knowledge systems that integrated astronomy, mathematics, ecology, and spiritual practice into a unified whole. She saw a civilization that had achieved sophistication in ways Western science was only beginning to rediscover. And she understood with absolute clarity what the sphere was: a library, a repository of knowledge compiled across centuries, encoded in a medium that would last millennia, designed to be accessed only by people who approached it with collaboration and respect rather than greed. The knowledge inside wasn't about power sources or weapons or anything that could be monetized or weaponized. It was about harmony, about systems thinking, about understanding the interconnectedness of all things and living in balance with natural cycles. It was everything Ruth had hoped for, and everything people like Thorne feared, because knowledge that couldn't be controlled, that couldn't be owned or patented or restricted, was worthless to those who measured value in dollars rather than wisdom. When they pulled their hands away, all three of them were crying. "Now we understand," Chin said, his voice shaking, "why it had to be hidden. Not because it was dangerous, because it was revolutionary. And revolutions threaten power structures. What do we do with it?" Sarah asked. Claire looked at the sphere, glowing gently in the morning light. Ruth's words echoed in her mind. "Don't hide again. Share it. We document everything," she said. "Every symbol, every concept we can access. We distribute it so widely that no one can suppress it. We make it impossible to control. They'll come after us," Chin warned. "Let them. By the time they do, it'll be too late. The knowledge will be out there." Claire smiled. That's what scared them most. Not what's in the box, but the idea that ordinary people might access it, might use it, might change the world with it. They worked through the morning, photographing, documenting, recording. Chin uploaded files to secure servers with automatic distribution protocols. Sarah contacted her journalist network with location coordinates and instructions. Claire wrote everything down in her own words, creating a record that even non-academics could understand. By noon, the knowledge was spreading. By evening, it had gone viral. Not as sensational treasure-hunting news, but as something deeper. Indigenous scholars recognized the significance immediately. Scientists saw implications for everything from sustainable technology to quantum computing. Philosophers found frameworks for thinking about consciousness and reality that bridged ancient wisdom and modern physics. The sphere itself they left at the spring, positioned where anyone could access it, photographing its exact coordinates and publishing them. If people wanted the knowledge, they could come get it. No gatekeepers, no fees, just a requirement that they approach it together, with respect, with openness to collaboration. Thorne did come back, 3 days later, with lawyers and court orders. But by then it was too late. The knowledge was public. Millions of people had accessed it, studied it, begun applying to problems ranging from climate change to social inequality. You couldn't put that genie back in the bottle. The court case dragged on for months, but ultimately collapsed. You can't claim ownership of knowledge that's already free. You can't suppress what millions of people have already learned. Dale Carver tried to file claims based on his family's history, but Sarah's documentation of Ruth's death, and evidence suggesting it wasn't accidental, led to investigations that occupied him for years. Claire stayed on the property. The cabin became a center for researchers, indigenous scholars, and anyone seeking to understand the knowledge Ruth had protected. Sarah helped manage the steady stream of visitors. Chin became a permanent fixture, coordinating academic study, while ensuring the work remained accessible rather than gatekept by institutions. And every winter solstice, they held a ceremony at the spring. People came from around the world to witness the sunrise and honor the women who'd kept the secret long enough for it to be shared at the right moment. Not too early, when fear and greed might have corrupted it. Not too late, when humanity might have needed it too desperately. But exactly when people were ready to receive it with wisdom rather than exploitation. Claire stood on the frozen lake 1 year later, watching another solstice sunrise paint the mountains gold. Juniper pressed against her leg, gray muzzle even grayer now, but eyes still bright. She thought about her husband, whose death had set her on this path, about grief that had become purpose, about loss that had led to discovery. She didn't know if he'd be proud of what she'd done, but she knew she was finally proud of herself. Finally felt like she was living a life that mattered. The ice beneath her feet hummed with the spring's perpetual vibration, the water speaking, the mountain listening, and Claire, finally, understanding what it meant to be home, not in a place, but in a purpose, in knowledge shared, in secrets released, in truth protected just long enough to set it free. The documentary crew arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, when the aspens had turned the mountainsides into rivers of gold. Claire watched her convoy of vehicles navigate the improved access road, still rough by city standards, but passable now for more than just pickup trucks with four-wheel drive. So much had changed. So much had stayed exactly the same. They're early, Sarah observed from the cabin porch, where she sat with her morning coffee and a tablet displaying emails from researchers in 7 countries. At 73 now, she showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, the work of managing the influx of visitors and scholars had energized her in ways retirement never had. Documentarians are always early, Chin said, emerging from what had once been a collapsing storage shed and was now a climate-controlled archive. They want to catch the authentic morning light, or some such thing. Claire smiled. The 3 of them had fallen into an easy rhythm over the past years. Part colleagues, part family, bound together by the secret they'd unsealed and the mission they'd undertaken to share it properly. The lead director, a woman named Angela Torres who'd won awards for her work on indigenous history, climbed out first. She was younger than Claire expected, maybe 35, with intelligent eyes that took in everything at once. The cabin, the lake beyond, the solar panels Chin had installed that somehow didn't look out of place against the century-old logs. Ms. Mathison, I'm Angela. Thank you for agreeing to this. Just Claire, please. And I should thank you. Ruth would have wanted the story told right. Claire gestured toward the cabin. Come inside. We'll give you the full history before we go down to the spring. Over coffee and Sarah's homemade biscuits. Because some traditions needed preserving, they told the story. Not the sensationalized version that had appeared in countless articles and conspiracy theory videos. The real story. About Margaret and her lonely winters. About Helen's desperate dive. About Ruth's lifelong guardianship that had cost her everything. And the sphere? Angela asked. The documentation shows it's still at the spring site. Hasn't anyone tried to steal it? 17 times, Chin said dryly. We have security now. Cameras, sensors, a rotation of graduate students who live on site. But mostly, the sphere protects itself. How? Claire exchanged glances with Sarah. Come see. They walked down to the lakeshore. No ice now, just clear water reflecting the impossible blue of high-altitude sky. The spring's location was marked by a simple stone structure that visiting architects had designed, working with indigenous elders to create something that honored the site's significance without overwhelming it. Inside the open-air shelter, positioned exactly where Claire and Sarah had first discovered it 3 years ago, the sphere rested on a pedestal of the same dark metal as the original box. It glowed softly in the filtered light, symbols flowing across its surface in patterns that seemed different every time Claire looked at them. Angela moved closer, camera operator following. It's beautiful, more beautiful than the photograph suggested. Touch it, Claire said. I thought the report said you needed multiple people. You do, to access the full knowledge repository. But anyone can touch it. Try. Angela reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the sphere's surface. She gasped and pulled back. It's warm. And I saw images, I think, too fast to process. Like it was testing me. It is, Sarah said. That's why theft attempts fail. The sphere doesn't just contain information. It evaluates intent. If you approach it with greed or the desired control, you get nothing. Just overwhelming confusion that sends people running. But if you approach with genuine curiosity, with respect, with the willingness to collaborate, it opens up. Chin finished. We've had thousands of people come here now. Students, scholars, artists, engineers. People from every continent. And the sphere shares different aspects of its knowledge with different people, based on what they're ready to understand and how they plan to use it. Angela was staring at the sphere with new wonder. That's impossible. That level of artificial intelligence. It's not artificial, Claire said quietly. That's what we've come to understand. The sphere is a machine or a database. It's something else. Something that the people who created it understood in ways we're only beginning to grasp. It's alive in a sense, or it contains a crystallized wisdom of people who've long since passed, preserved in a medium we can't yet replicate. Indigenous knowledge systems, Angela said slowly, never separated the sacred from the scientific, the spiritual from the practical. Exactly. Sarah smiled. Western science has spent centuries trying to make everything measurable, quantifiable, reducible to equations. But what if some knowledge works differently? What if wisdom can be encoded in ways that require not just intellectual understanding, but emotional and spiritual readiness? They spent the morning filming. Claire explaining how she'd found the property. Sarah describing Ruth's death and the suppressed investigation that had finally been reopened. Chin discussing the academic research that had exploded in the wake of the sphere's revelation. But the most powerful moment came when Angela asked the question Claire had been waiting for. What about the people who wanted to control this? Richard Thorne and the foundation he represented. Dale Carver, the federal agents who tried to seize it. What happened to them? Claire settled into one of the chairs positioned near the spring. Juniper, grayer now, moving more slowly, but still loyal, rested her head on Claire's knee. Thorne's foundation collapsed within a year. Once the knowledge became public, their entire business model, controlling access to rare artifacts and information, became worthless. The wealthy clients who'd funded them weren't interested in wisdom everyone could access. They wanted exclusivity, status, power. When they couldn't get that, the money dried up. And Thorne himself? Last I heard, he was teaching at a community college. Philosophy, I think. Sarah's journalist did excellent work exposing how his foundation had acquired artifacts through questionable means. Museums started returning indigenous materials. Governments began questioning the whole concept of private ownership of cultural heritage. It started a movement we're still seeing play out. Angela turned to Sarah. And Dale Carver? Sarah's expression hardened slightly. The investigation into Ruth's death revealed things we suspected but couldn't prove. Dale's father had been pressuring Ruth for years, making threats. There was evidence, emails, recorded phone calls, suggesting they considered removing her as an obstacle. We couldn't prove Dale himself was involved in her death, but the evidence was enough to ruin his reputation. His hunting lodge closed. He lost everything. Do you feel vindicated? I feel sad, Sarah said honestly. Ruth didn't want revenge. She wanted the knowledge protected until it could be shared responsibly. Dale's obsession destroyed him more thoroughly than any legal punishment could have. If he'd approached Ruth with respect, offered collaboration instead of threats, she might have worked with him. But his family's greed made that impossible. That's the real tragedy. Chin walked them to the archive, where filing cabinets and climate control storage held Margaret's original journals, Helen's documents, Ruth's research notes, but also new materials, studies from researchers around the world, papers describing how knowledge from the sphere had influenced everything from sustainable architecture to quantum physics. The most remarkable thing, Chin said, pulling out a folder, has been watching indigenous communities reclaim narratives. For so long, Western academics studied indigenous knowledge systems as curiosities, historical footnotes. But the sphere proved those systems weren't primitive. They were sophisticated in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. He showed Angela photographs of collaborations happening globally, Australian Aboriginal elders working with quantum physicists, Andean communities sharing agricultural knowledge that was revolutionizing sustainable farming, Arctic peoples whose understanding of ice dynamics was helping climate scientists model complex systems. The sphere didn't give us new knowledge so much as it validated old knowledge, Chin continued. It proved that indigenous sciences had achieved things Western science is still struggling to understand. That changed everything. Power dynamics in academia, funding priorities, who gets listened to and who gets dismissed. And that, Claire added, is why people like Thorne fought so hard to control it. Not because the knowledge itself was dangerous, but because releasing it undermined systems of power and profit that had worked for centuries. Late afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows as they finished filming interior shots. Angela's crew was packing equipment when a group of visitors arrived. 3 graduate students from New Zealand and an elder from a Shoshone community in Idaho. Claire greeted them warmly. This was normal now, a steady stream of people making pilgrimage to the spring, seeking access to the sphere, wanting to understand what Ruth had protected and why. We have protocols, she explained to Angela. Everyone who comes must first attend an orientation. We explain the history, the significance, the responsibility that comes with accessing the knowledge. We ask them to articulate what they hope to learn and how they plan to use it. Then they spend time with the sphere, always in groups, never alone, because collaboration is the key. Do you ever turn people away? Rarely, but sometimes people self-select out. When they understand this isn't about gaining personal advantage or making money, some lose interest. They leave on their own. That's fine. The sphere isn't for everyone. It's for people ready to approach wisdom with humility. As the New Zealand students headed down to the spring with their elder guide, Angela asked one final question. What about you, Claire? You came here running from grief. Bought this property for almost nothing. Now you're managing something that's become globally significant. How has it changed you? Claire was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lake where afternoon light turned the water into liquid gold. I came here thinking I was buying distance, space to grieve, a place to hide from a life that felt unbearable after my husband died. She stroked Juniper's soft ears. What I found was purpose. Not instead of grief. I still miss him every day. But alongside it, grief doesn't disappear. You just learn to carry it differently. And the property? The cabin? What happens to all this when I'm gone? Claire smiled. Sarah and I have established a trust. The property will never be sold or developed. It'll remain open for research, for visitors, for anyone seeking the knowledge the sphere contains. We're training people to continue the work, not as gatekeepers, but as stewards, the same way Margaret and Helen and Ruth were stewards. She stood, moving to the window where she could see the spring shelter in the distance. Ruth spent her entire life protecting something she believed the world needed but wasn't ready for. She was right. If this had been discovered earlier, if people like Thorne had gotten control when indigenous voices had even less power than they do now, it would have been exploited, commodified, destroyed in the process of trying to profit from it. But it was discovered at exactly the right moment, Angela said. Exactly the right moment, Claire agreed, when social movements were already questioning old power structures, when indigenous rights were gaining recognition, when people were ready to hear that Western science doesn't have all the answers, that wisdom can come from sources academia traditionally dismissed. Sarah joined them at the window. Ruth used to say the mountain keeps time differently than humans do, that a century is nothing to stone and ice, that the lake held its secret until the moment was right to release it. I used to think that was just poetic. Now I believe she was right. The documentary crew departed as the sun touched the mountain peaks, promising to return for the winter solstice filming. Claire, Sarah, and Chin stood on the porch watching the vehicles navigate back down the improved road. How many this year? Sarah asked, referring to the solstice gathering. Last count was 400 registered attendees, Chin said, plus probably another 100 who'll show up without registering. We'll need to expand the shelter area again. Good problems to have, Claire said. That evening, after dinner, Claire took Juniper for their customary walk around the property. The dog moved more slowly now, but still insisted on the routine. They walked to the spring, where the last visitors were leaving, their faces showing the same awe Claire remembered from her first encounter with the sphere. She sat on the bench someone had carved from local pine, watching the sphere's gentle glow as twilight deepened. The symbols on its surface seemed to pulse in rhythm with the spring's eternal flow. You did it, she whispered to ghosts only she could hear. Margaret, Helen, Ruth, you kept it safe long enough. It's free now. It's helping people. changing things. Exactly the way you hoped. The sphere's glow seemed to brighten slightly, though that was probably imagination. Probably. Juniper nudged her hand, and Claire stood, beginning to walk back to the cabin. Lights glowed warm in the windows. Sarah and Chin were probably arguing good-naturedly about something academic, the way they did most evenings. Home was waiting. Halfway back, Claire stopped and looked up. The stars were emerging, impossibly bright at this altitude, away from any light pollution. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light. The same stars Margaret had watched, the same stars the sphere's creators had encoded into their knowledge system. Everything connected, everything part of larger patterns. That was the real gift the sphere offered, not specific technologies or formulas, but a way of seeing, a way of understanding relationships between things that seemed separate, between past and present, between science and wisdom, between individual grief and collective purpose. Claire's phone buzzed with a text from her sister, the first family member who'd visited after the story broke, hesitant but curious. The text was brief. Saw the documentary announcement. Proud of you. Mom would be too. Tears pricked Claire's eyes. Her mother had died 2 years before Claire's husband. Sometimes grief came in waves, hitting unexpectedly even years later. But Sarah was right. You learn to carry it differently, alongside joy, alongside purpose, alongside all the complicated, beautiful, painful things that made life worth living. She texted back, "Thank you. That means everything." At the cabin, she found Sarah and Chin exactly where she'd imagined, at the table, papers spread between them, deep in debate about whether next summer's research symposium should focus on agricultural applications or architectural innovations drawn from sphere knowledge. "Both," Claire said, settling into her chair. "We'll do both. Split the sessions. There's no reason to choose." They looked at her, then at each other, then laughed. "Ruth would have said the same thing," Sarah said. Ruth usually did say the same thing. Chin agreed. She never saw the point in false dichotomies. They worked late into the evening, planning for symposia and solstice gatherings, for educational programs and visiting scholar rotations. Work that would have felt overwhelming once, but now felt natural. Necessary. Right. When Sarah and Chin finally headed to their respective cabins, smaller structures built over the past years to accommodate permanent residents, Claire sat alone by the fire with Juniper dozing at her feet. She pulled out Margaret's first journal, the one that had started everything. The leather was soft from handling now, the pages familiar as prayer. January 15th, 1889. The men from town say I'm mad to winter here alone. They say the cold will kill me, or the isolation will drive me to it myself. They don't understand that I came here to escape madness, not embrace it. Claire read the familiar words, feeling connected across time to a woman she'd never met but understood completely. Margaret had come seeking distance and found purpose, had kept secrets because she understood they needed protection, had trusted that someday someone would find what she'd hidden and know what to do with it. That someone had been Claire, a widow buying worthless land for $800, looking for nothing but space to grieve, stumbling into a mystery that would change her life and, eventually, change the world. "Thank you," Claire whispered to Margaret's ghost, "for keeping the secret, for leaving the clues, for trusting that someone would eventually understand." The fire crackled. Juniper's breathing was slow and peaceful. Outside, the lake reflected starlight like a mirror, and deep beneath the spring's eternal flow, the sphere glowed softly, waiting for tomorrow's visitors, ready to share its wisdom with anyone who approached with open heart and collaborative spirit. The mountain kept its promises. The water still spoke. And Claire, no longer running from grief, but running toward purpose, had finally found her way home. Not to a place, though this land would always be precious, but to herself, to truth, to the understanding that some secrets are worth protecting and some knowledge is worth freeing, and wisdom lies in knowing the difference. The lake would freeze again come winter. The spring would keep flowing beneath the ice. The sphere would continue, sharing its knowledge with those ready to receive it. And Claire would be here, stewarding what Ruth had protected, honoring what Margaret had discovered, continuing what Helen had risked everything to preserve. Some legacies weren't inherited through blood. Some were inherited through courage, through the willingness to see mystery and move toward it rather than away, through the understanding that the most valuable treasures are the ones you give away. Claire closed the journal gently and placed it back in its protective case. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new questions, new opportunities to share the knowledge that had been hidden for so long. But tonight was for rest, for gratitude, for the quiet satisfaction of knowing she'd honored the women who came before her and protected something precious for those who would come after. The fire burned low, the stars wheeled overhead, and on a frozen lake in the Wyoming mountains, where water spoke and mountains listened, secrets that had been buried for a century continued changing the world, one collaborative discovery at a time, exactly as they were always meant to.